For decades, Conway Twitty and Loretta Lynn insisted it was just friendship. But behind the stage, lights, and studio walls, something else was happening, something neither of them dared speak aloud. Fans had long speculated, reporters had pried, even family members had asked, but both stars kept quiet. Until the very end. Because before Conway Twitty passed away, he finally admitted what Loretta Lynn had meant to him. And what he confessed changes everything we thought we knew about the most iconic duo in country music history. When Loretta Lynn and Conway Twitty first recorded together in 1971, it was supposed to be a one-off collaboration. Their song After the Fire Is Gone struck like lightning, winning them a Grammy and landing at the top of the country charts. But it wasn't just the music that resonated, it was the connection. On stage, their chemistry was electric. Offstage, it was even harder to ignore. They laughed easily. They touched often. They finished each other's sentences like two halves of the same mind. Audiences could feel it. This wasn't just performance. Something real was happening between them. And yet, both were married. Both had families. And both, for years, refused to acknowledge anything more than friendship. Still, fans weren't buying it. In the conservative world of country music, where family values reigned, Loretta and Conway's bond raised eyebrows. Rumors followed them from city to city. Some whispered about stolen weekends during their tours. Others claimed that their spouses had grown uneasy with just how close the two had become. But no matter the gossip, Loretta and Conway remained publicly united and personally silent. What made their partnership even more fascinating was how deeply they seemed to understand each other. Loretta had come from poverty in Butcher Hollow, Kentucky. She married young, raised 6 kids, and fought her way into a male-dominated industry with nothing but talent and grit. Conway had a similar arc, born Harold Jenkins. He clawed his way from rock and roll obscurity into country music royalty, reinventing himself with every step. They weren't just co-stars. They were survivors, and they saw something in each other that few others could. But it wasn't just admiration. Loretta once called Conway the only man in my life I could truly count on. And Conway, when asked why they worked so well together, said simply, "We just get each other." Those words, said in passing, carried weight. Because for two people who had seen so much, done so much, and built so much, what they didn't say often meant more than what they did. Behind the scenes, their friendship grew deeper. Loretta turned to Conway during her darkest moments, including the near loss of her husband Doolittle and the death of her children. Conway, too, leaned on Loretta when his personal life became tangled, when his health started to decline, and when the demands of stardom became too heavy to bear. Their bond became something sacred, something private. But over time, that privacy became its own kind of mystery. Fans asked why they never recorded a final duet, why they never made their connection official, why, after all those years, they never once said, yes, there was more. And that silence made the rumors louder. Loretta's children later hinted that there had been something unspoken between them. Conway's daughter recalled that her father would light up differently around Loretta than around anyone else. And just before his death in 1993, Conway made a quiet admission, one that would stay hidden for years. By the early 1990s, Conway Twitty was growing tired, not of the music, but of the weight that came with it. Decades of touring, recording, and quietly carrying his own struggles had left him worn. Friends noticed the change. He seemed more distant, more reflective. There was a sense never said aloud that he knew his time was running out, and he wanted to settle things before it did. He started reaching out to the people who had mattered most in his life. And again, one name came up: Loretta. They hadn't recorded together in years. Their duet partnership had faded from the spotlight as the 80s gave way to new country stars. But for Conway, her absence hadn't dulled the bond. In fact, it had only made it clearer. As he slowed down, he started to speak of her differently. Not in public, but in quiet moments, with people he trusted. His daughter Kathy was one of them. In a moment that would stay with her forever, Conway opened up about Loretta in a way he never had before. His voice was soft, but there was no hesitation. He said he had spent a lifetime trying to be the man the world wanted him to be: charming, strong, invulnerable. But with Loretta, he didn't have to try. She saw through it all and accepted him anyway. Then he said something Kathy never forgot. "She was the love I never got to keep." It was a sentence loaded with both love and restraint. Not a scandal, not a regret, but a truth he had held in his chest for 30 years. He never said they were lovers, never claimed betrayal. But in that moment, he admitted that Loretta was the one person he had always loved from a distance. She was married. He was respectful. They were both stars trying to survive in a business that chewed up the vulnerable. So he never crossed the line, and yet, the love was always there. That love had been threaded through their music. It had been visible in every glance on stage, every pause between lyrics. Fans had seen it, critics had noted it, but no one ever had proof. Until that moment. Kathy didn't speak of it for years. She kept it tucked away, like a final message between father and daughter. It wasn't until long after his death that she shared it. And when she did, fans weren't shocked. They were heartbroken, because it confirmed what so many had long believed: there was a kind of love between Loretta and Conway that never got its ending. Their silence had been out of respect for their families, for their fans, for the vows they'd made to other people. But even in silence, the truth had been there, lingering in the margins of every duet they ever sang. And yet, one question still lingered. If Conway had said it before he died, if he had finally named what she meant to him, then what had Loretta felt all those years? Why hadn't she ever said it back? Why had she stayed silent, even after he was gone? The answer wouldn't come in an interview or a headline, but in the way Loretta changed after Conway's death, in what she chose to say about him, and more importantly, what she left unsaid. Because sometimes, the deepest feelings are the ones we never say aloud, and Loretta Lynn was grieving in her own way. When news broke in June of 1993 that Conway Twitty had died suddenly from an abdominal aneurysm, Loretta Lynn didn't give a press conference. She didn't write a public tribute. She didn't even perform for a while. Instead, she disappeared. Those closest to her said she was devastated in a way they hadn't seen since the loss of her children. But this time, it wasn't just grief, it was silence. And for someone who had always been outspoken, always willing to confront heartache with honesty, that silence said everything. She canceled appearances. She turned down interviews. And when she did speak, her voice was different, softer, more distant. It was as if something vital had been taken from her. Not just a duet partner, but a part of herself that only existed when Conway was near. Fans waited for her to open up. For years they waited. But she never gave them the moment they were hoping for. She never said she had loved him, never confirmed the rumors, never gave the press the quote they wanted. Instead, she told stories. Small, simple stories. Like how he used to make her laugh so hard she couldn't sing. How he once gave her a coat when she was cold backstage. How he stood up for her when label executives doubted her writing. These weren't grand confessions. They were fragments, scattered pieces of a shared history too sacred to explain. One of the most telling moments came during a television special years after Conway's death. Loretta was asked about her favorite performance with him. She smiled, but her eyes welled up. She said, "I don't have just one. Every time we sang together, it felt like home." She paused, then added, "And I don't think I'll ever feel that again." That quiet admission carried more weight than any headline, because she wasn't just talking about music. She was talking about belonging, about a connection so deep, so rare, it couldn't be recreated. Not in a studio, not on a stage, not even in memory. Friends said Loretta kept a photo of Conway in her home, not a formal publicity still, but a candid shot. Him in a denim jacket, grinning, mid-laugh. She never talked about it, never pointed it out, but it was there, framed, prominent, untouched. And when she was inducted into multiple halls of fame in the years that followed, she never failed to mention him. She thanked her family, her fans, her mentors, and Conway every single time. It wasn't just loyalty, it was presence. Even in death, he was still beside her. Some wondered if she had regrets about things left unsaid, moments missed, or boundaries held too tightly. But if she did, she never let it show. Because Loretta Lynn didn't deal in fantasy. She was forged in hardship. She lived in the real. And the real truth was this: whatever she and Conway had, it was theirs. And no one else ever got to define it. She once said in passing, "Conway knew me better than most." It was a small phrase, easy to miss, but packed with meaning. Because for someone who had spent her entire life breaking barriers, surviving heartbreak, and telling the truth through song, Loretta chose, in this one case, to protect the silence. Not because it wasn't love, but maybe because it was. As the years passed, fans clung to the dream that one day, Loretta Lynn would sit down and finally explain what Conway Twitty really meant to her. Not in passing, not through a song, but in full. With honesty, with finality. That moment never came. And maybe that was the point. Because when people spoke about Conway and Loretta, they didn't talk about scandal. They talked about longing. About the way he looked at her across the microphone stand. About the soft smile she'd give him when the last note of a duet faded. It wasn't passion that lingered in fans' memories, it was something deeper, something unfinished. Their songs often carried that same emotional weight. Tracks like Lead Me On and After the Fire Is Gone weren't just about fictional lovers, they felt personal, as if they were telling their own story in a language only they understood. They recorded 11 albums together, won multiple awards, filled arenas with fans who didn't just love the music, they loved the idea of them. The connection that never needed to be spelled out. And maybe, for Conway and Loretta, that was enough. Maybe naming it would have broken it. Maybe turning it into something public would have stolen the one thing that had remained theirs alone. But silence comes with a cost. When Conway died, Loretta didn't just lose a duet partner. She lost the one person who had seen her through decades of change, pain, and fame. Someone who had never judged her for her mistakes. Someone who didn't ask her to be anyone but herself. And Conway? He spent years beside her, in buses, dressing rooms, and green rooms, always close, never too close. He once said he felt most himself when they were on stage together. It was where the weight lifted, where they didn't have to pretend. But when the music stopped, they went their separate ways. Back to their spouses, their children, their own pain. There were moments where they could have changed it all. Times when they were both hurting, when their marriages were crumbling, when life would have allowed it. But neither of them crossed that line. Was it out of loyalty, fear, or the understanding that the idea of them might be more powerful than the reality? In later years, Loretta would mention Conway in interviews. Not often, but when she did, it was always with a softness in her voice. She never described him as a partner or a soulmate. But she didn't have to. Her face said it all. The emotion sat right under the surface. A kind of ache you carry when you've loved someone deeply and never quite said it out loud. And maybe that's why their story still lingers, why it still draws people in after all these years. Because most of us have that one person, the almost, the might have been, the one who stayed just out of reach, not because the love wasn't there, but because the timing never was. For Conway and Loretta, the silence between them wasn't emptiness. It was sacred. And maybe that's why, even now, the mystery feels more intimate than any confession could have. They didn't need to say it. They had already sung it. In the final chapter of Loretta Lynn's life, fans began to notice something missing from her concerts. She still sang her hits. She still told her stories. But there were fewer Conway songs. Fewer mentions of the man who had once been her other half in music. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't avoidance. It felt more like preservation, like the memories were too fragile to keep revisiting. Because for Loretta, Conway had never been just a duet partner. He had been the only man in Nashville who never treated her like she didn't belong. He saw her as an equal from the very beginning. When others doubted her writing, her accent, her ambition, he never did. He didn't compete with her, he stood beside her, every step of the way. And when he died, something in her music changed. Not dramatically, but if you listen closely, the spark in her duets with others never quite returned. The rhythm was still there. The lyrics were still sharp, but that old warmth, that unspoken ease was gone. She released albums, she won awards, but she never formed another musical partnership that came close to what she had with Conway, because it wasn't just talent, it was trust. After Conway's death, Loretta recorded a tribute song titled "I Can't Hear the Music," a quiet, aching piece about losing someone whose presence was louder than any crowd. It wasn't a chart topper. It wasn't even heavily promoted, but it said what she couldn't say otherwise. It was a goodbye, and it was the closest she ever came to admitting what he had meant to her. That song, like so many others they had sung together, now plays differently. Fans hear it through a new lens, colored by the confession Conway made in his final days. The lyrics, once poetic, now feel like a coded farewell, a whispered truth between two people who never needed to spell things out. And that's what still haunts people, the not knowing, the not saying. The way these two legends, who had sung about heartbreak and desire and devotion with such honesty, had chosen to keep their deepest feelings locked away. But maybe that's why their story matters. Because it reminds us that love isn't always loud. It isn't always declared in grand gestures or captured in photographs. Sometimes it exists in restraint, in respect, in the choice not to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. And sometimes, the greatest love stories are the ones that stay unfinished. Conway Twitty never got to sing that one last song with Loretta Lynn. He never got to stand beside her one final time and look into her eyes as they harmonized on stage. But he left behind something more lasting. A truth, quietly spoken at the end of his life, that finally gave fans the answer they'd long waited for. She was the love I never got to keep. And Loretta? She never said those words, but she lived them. In every pause, in every look, in every note of every song they ever sang together. Their love story didn't need a chapter title or a public vow. It was already written. In the history of country music, few partnerships have ever come close to what Conway Twitty and Loretta Lynn shared. Their voices blended like they were made for each other. Their chemistry was undeniable. And yet, the most powerful part of their story was the silence, the things they never said, the lines they never crossed, and the truth they both carried until the end. Conway's final confession didn't scandalize it, humanized. It reminded fans that behind the glittering stage lights and platinum records were two people navigating the complexity of fame, loyalty, and timing. People who found something rare in each other, even if they never fully had the chance to claim it. Loretta never gave us a dramatic revelation. She didn't have to. She let the music speak for her. And for those who listened closely, it said more than any headline ever could. They didn't get the fairy tale ending. But what they had, what they kept sacred, was perhaps even more enduring. Because some love stories don't fade when the curtain falls. They echo. For more emotional stories, check out this video.